This is Roger Simon.
And Lionel Chetwynd.
Welcome back to Pollywood. Matt Atchity and Rotten Tomatoes in a minute. But, you know, Lionel and I have spent a lot of time on this show blabbing our opinions about Hollywood and politics, but today we have a guest who actually does it for a living and knows the subject.
Our humble opinion is about to be confronted by an authoritative one.
And that authoritative person is Ted Johnson, the legal and political editor of Variety, the voice of Hollywood. Welcome to Pollywood.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you.
Great to be here.
And let's start with this, because this is a little self-serving, because PJ Media just did a video called The Least Interesting Man in the World, and Right Change, another political organization, did a similar video, both mocking the most interesting man in the world commercials. I know you had a look at it. What do you think?
Well, I like the PJ Media. I like that one better. I like that one better.
I knew you'd say that.
But this is the reason. It has more humor. Humor really works well on the web. You both know that. It's the thing that gets the attention. And also, there's bits of humor in Most Arrogant Man of the World, but it may be a little too on the nose for the message that they're trying to convey. This one gets at it from a different angle and maybe a little more catchy, you know, a little less preachy and a little more catchy.
Premature.
Okay.
I think they raise a larger question, right? Everything I don't understand, I try to raise to a higher level of abstraction here. And that is, what really is the role of Hollywood and Hollywood people? They are more clamorous, you hear more of them, we're more involved, the web has made it possible for all kinds of, everyone in Hollywood now is out busy making a spot. Now, you see it slightly differently than the rest of us. You're kind of above it and watching it, you know the politicians and you cover them. How important, if at all, or is it just simply self-importance? We talk about, say, we're doing this and we're doing that. Do we really matter at all? I mean, in the larger sense?
Well, you know, when I started covering this beat, I said to myself, you know, I really do think that stars really help in terms of fundraising. And that's where it kind of ends. And I was admonished by a lot of people, and I tried to rethink that thought. And now, again, this year, I'm again thinking, I do think that stars, their number one role for campaigns is raising money, is getting people into the event. That's why you see the Obama campaign out there having events with Sarah Jessica Parker, having events with George Clooney. Where I think it's really in doubt is when they actually go out on the campaign trail, where it's more of a wash, where they go on the campaign trail and say, vote for this candidate. I think that it may bring people to rallies, but there's a certain point where people are really kind of turned off by it. And I think that, especially as we get closer and closer to the election, both campaigns are going to be a little more judicious about how they actually deploy these celebrities out there. Where I do think that Hollywood has an impact is actually in the content, what we see in prime time, what we see in the movies, and maybe not so much for campaigns, but more for certain types of issues.
Which raises an interesting question. I mean, I agree with you. I think there's a constant political message being turned out by Hollywood. I sit at home at night and watch and take notes. No, I think there is, and I think it's generally conceded that's the truth. But if you talk to someone though, and say, you know, what about the violence? What about the other things they said, no. The popular culture has no influence on behavior. So which is it? The overt political statements being made by people like Aaron Sorkin are just going over people's heads.
Sure. And I think that, I don't think that it's true in every case. It depends on how you do it. I think that the worst thing that a content creator can probably do is say, oh, I want to send a political message. And then they're going to hit the audience over the head. That's going to turn people off. But I think that there's a gradual sway that culture, the entertainment culture, can actually have. Take the issue of gay rights and gay marriage, right, and the way that really emerged from Ellen DeGeneres to Will and Grace to what we have right now, which is like a gay character in prime time everywhere.
Right. As Jews were in the 90s on Seinfeld and in every show.
Yes, exactly. I think it's a much more subtle way of introducing maybe social change into the culture, into the mindset. You do have cases where documentaries actually can have an impact. I just wrote about one that's called The Invisible War. It's about the problem of sexual crimes within the military. And this was introduced at Sundance, and just the publicity over it really did actually force Leon Panetta, the Secretary of Defense, to take a look at this and institute some changes to the military policy even before the film was released. So you do have those examples. Those tend to be a little more isolated.
Well, that's hard power.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, taking another slightly different direction. Having sat in your chair at Variety for how many years now? For a few years.
Oh, almost 10, actually.
Wow,
Yeah.
well, it's like me here. Have you noticed any change in the Hollywood community politically? Has it shifted to the right in any way?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, I think what's happened, especially since Obama got into office, is the right has gotten more organized. It's not as diffused as it used to be. You do have groups like Friends of Abe that meet, and that has helped them actually speak somewhat with a collective voice. I don't think they will ever speak with one voice, but I don't think that there's any sign that there will be parity, between Democrats and Republicans anytime soon. And I think even in this campaign, the Obama supporters are going to far outnumber the Romney supporters. In fact, it may even be more pronounced this cycle than it was last cycle. But I do think that the right is more organized than it used to be, more visible than it used to be.
I have a question for you based on, because you speak to both sides. I know you speak to many people on the right and many people on the left. You have a very good picture of it. I think the problem is between the reason that conservatives will never become predominant in Hollywood is, and now this is loaded and you can shoot me down. I find that the Hollywood left basically have a single voice. It's very on message, very in unison. They sing like a Handel choir. The problem on the
Kind
right
of the
is,
opposite of the national picture.
right, well, yeah, but here it's very, because they're all here pretty much the one wing of the Democrat Party. I think the problem on our side is that every time we reach critical mass, whether it was the Wednesday Morning Club or the FOA, faction, the Stalinists want to take down the Trotskyites. You can't, it's like herding cats. And now you speak to both sides. Do you find that?
Well, I actually do think that since I started covering this beat, which was around '06, I do think that the right has gotten more organized, but it's still, as you said, it's still not going to be as pronounced and as dominant. And I think a good example of this is the fact that you still read stories, not in Variety, but in other publications about, what it is like to be a Hollywood conservative. It's still a novelty. Right. And the question is, can they move beyond that point where it's still treated, where it's more like it was back in maybe the Clinton years when you had the Wednesday Morning Club, where it may not have been such a novelty and people were a little more visible.
It was harder then, though, to be a conservative in terms of getting employment. It's a lot easier now. But I mean, I greeted with great joy the Amy Palladino, Shonda Rhimes set to, because it was a sign that cracks on the other side. We're riven with it. I mean, we're very...
Now, when you say that there are, I mean, what do you mean on the right? There are some people who are more libertarian, others are more socially conservative. That we know, but that's true nationally, too.
Well, the point is, it's very hard to get conservative, the right of center community in Hollywood. It's hard to get them to cohere around anything. They would talk for years, we're going to have a fundraiser, we're going to do it. Well, we can't. We can't for a couple of reasons, which have to do with the size of the, we have superstars, but they don't want to come out and say so. I mean, that's another thing, too. I think do you think there's a subtle pressure in Hollywood, subtle or hard? I mean, in the 80s, HBO overtly said they would not hire me because I was a conservative. You don't do that anymore, but isn't there a tremendous career pressure? I mean, what do you see?
But this is where I don't doubt that has occurred, that has happened, because you hear these stories over and over again. But where I see the biggest impact is so much of this business is dependent upon who you know, how much you know, your contacts, and a lot of the social gatherings in the entertainment business take place at political functions. So that to the extent that Hollywood leans to the left, more of the political functions are going to be the left. So there's that pressure from right there.
I've always felt that. I always felt that was true, and everything in Hollywood is a job market. And
I never underestimate the impact of jobs.
And now more than ever. I mean, because not just in Hollywood, but in the world.
Those guys who walked around and said, I didn't have a career because I was blacklisted. You know, my problem is I didn't get the Democratic jobs fair. I couldn't afford to be a Democrat. That was a joke at one point. In order to be a Democrat, you had to have 10 grand to go to the fundraiser. But you know,
I do think that there is going to be a pretty big disparity between Obama supporters and Romney supporters. The amount of money that Obama raises from Hollywood this year and the amount that Romney raises, and it may even be more pronounced than it was with McCain.
And I think the reason, because nationally, of course, Romney is doing great.
Romney is doing great.
Obama at this moment.
And I think it's almost entirely a function of the fact that Romney just does not have the connections to the entertainment business that John McCain had, even George W. Bush had. So it's going to be interesting to see whether he has this Hollywood-centric fundraiser, whether he the extent to which he actually tries to reach into this community.
Thanks, Ted. And now let's go to Rotten Tomatoes and Matt Atchity for what's coming up in film.
Hi, I'm Matt Atchity, editor-in-chief of RottenTomatoes.com, here to let you know what's in theaters this weekend. It's actually a great weekend for going to see movies. We've got 3 really well-reviewed movies. All 3 of the wide releases are fresh. First up, we'll talk about The Amazing Spider-Man. This is a reboot of the Spider-Man franchise. Now, we did just get 3 Spider-Man movies not so long ago, so it does seem a little early to be rebooting them, but for the most part, the critics like it. 72%, certified fresh on the tomato meter. You've got a great cast here: Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Martin Sheen, Sally Field, Dennis Leary. The movie is directed by Mark Webb, who directed 500 Days of Summer, and it's a really solid character piece. I know a lot of people were a little unsure about rebooting the story, and yes, you do get another origin story, which kind of leads a little bit of a feeling of been there, done that. But that being said, it's actually pretty good, and for retelling a story that we do know, they do a pretty solid job here, so I would definitely recommend that movie. Next up, we've got Katy Perry's Part of Me, which is the story of her world tour that happened in 2011. And as expected, it is mostly a concert film along the lines of what we saw with the Justin Bieber film, the Jonas Brothers movie. This is in 3D, so I will warn you. Now, this movie is pretty well done, 76% on the tomato meter, certified fresh. It's not your typical documentary, your typical concert film. You do get a little bit more behind the scenes than I think you'd expect. It actually becomes this really interesting look at somebody who's a celebrity and realizing that even though they may seem to have it all, when the chips are down, they feel pain too. But this is a pretty good movie. For the most part, it's pretty fun and something I definitely recommend if you're a Katy Perry fan. The last film we have coming up this week is Savages, which is the latest film from Oliver Stone. Savages tells the story of 3 friends who have a drug business that's doing pretty well down in Southern California, and then the Mexican cartels move in and want a piece of the action. As you can expect from an Oliver Stone movie, things get really violent really fast. This is a very lurid film. It's not for the faint of heart. This is not a subtle film. Oliver Stone doesn't do subtlety. But if you're an Oliver Stone fan, you're going to find a lot to like here. It's about 68% on the tomato meter. Some critics say that it is a little bit too over the top. But for the most part, most of the critics are pretty positive. And this is probably your most adult choice to go see this weekend. That's it for the movies this weekend. For all of the tomato meter scores for everything in theaters and new on DVD this week, make sure to check RottenTomatoes.com.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Ted Johnson. We'll see you next time when Lionel's going to ask you some questions about Hollywood and the political scene in Washington. This is Roger Simon.
And Lionel Chetwynd.
Next week in Pollywood.